you for asking me to be a part of this panel. Film. I've got a Sundance voice, which means it's gone, so I apologize for that. But I was approached by American Experience, Mark Samuels. He asked me if I wanted to do a documentary about the final days of the war in Vietnam. And I'd always been interested in Vietnam, so I was kind of organically drawn to it. But what really excited me is in doing research about it and kind of really looking into what happened during those final days and kind of the story that we end up focusing on is the fact that, as many I'm sure we know, Saigon fell much faster than we had expected it to, than anybody expected it to. So the United States in the last moment said that we're just going to evacuate Americans out of Vietnam and basically leave all the South Vietnamese behind who had worked with us very closely during the war, a very long, protracted war, had very close-knit relationships. And so our story is in the face of that kind of makeshift evacuation. The people, Americans on the ground, primarily Americans, also South Vietnamese, who went against U.S. policy to evacuate the South Vietnamese. And so, I think kind of more consistent with my line of work and the types of documentaries I've done in the past. It's very story-oriented. It's very much focused on these individuals who did very heroic acts during those final days to get as many South Vietnamese out of Vietnam as possible. And they knew if they were left behind, they would risk death or torture or being put in camps, re-education camps, hard labor camps.
Well, it's so interesting as you open your film with who's going to stay, who's going to go. And then later, in some part of the film, you have an officer that said, I wasn't trained to be the guy to make the evac plans, but I just had to go with my heart. And that was very telling to me. It sort of tied into this thing again of what's the truth of the situation? What was really going on there?
Yeah, and I think the film kind of shows that, Congress was responsible for what happened. The president, Nixon, was responsible. Ford played his own role. Kissinger certainly played his role. There are all these kind of major kind of forces in history working against the people on the ground, and they're all making the policies and making these decisions thousands of miles away in Washington. And then, our film, we don't have a narrator in the film. We don't have any experts, quote unquote experts looking back who went there. It's all people who were on the ground at the time. And they I think create a portrait of what was going on and the decisions that had to be made, really by the seat of their pants. And I think, again, it's a story that hasn't been told, and it has a lot of relevance to me today as we, I'm very for getting out of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but I have a much deeper appreciation for the need to do that gingerly and, getting out of these wars and the responsibilities you have to the people on the ground. We have the same issues in these wars where we have Iraqi and Afghani translators and cooks who worked at the embassies and people who worked with the CIA and who we're now leaving behind and who are at great risk. And what is our responsibility as a country who's decided to go into these wars? What is our responsibility when we're leaving these